Hello guys, and welcome to the first video that I hope to do several of for my YouTube channel. Um, I'm going to weather this car in a similar fashion as I've done a few others that I've posted a few pictures of on my Google Plus profile. But I'm going to show you the very simple techniques that I'm using. So today we're doing another L&N hopper to match this 2-bay hopper. Very early prototypes. I think these were new, and their new date is 1918. So they have, by 1952 or 3, the years that I model, they have seen quite a bit of wear and tear, damage, and had a fairly hard life. So, and um, and we have a few others, Norfolk and Western stuff that I model Norfolk and Western, but Norfolk and Western interchanged with the Clinchfield and the L&N Railroad, and there'll be a lot of it's intermixed traffic. Um, okay, so first is I really like working with alcohol products, 91% or higher alcohol. So you can dual coat. I've got a can of dual coat, and I like the effects of dual coat. It's really simple, and a lot of people use it, and I don't have anything against it. I will say that it does take dry effect a little bit better, and as you'll see as we do some dry effects in a minute, that it will. It does take a little bit more work to get the alcohol to take the dry material versus the dual coat where it sticks a lot better. So first is I make my own weathering powders with various chalks that I get in this artist chalk. This particular color I'm really fond of, and it gives an incredible rust. I've already shaved a bit of that material here, and we're just going to catch it in our artist tray to work with. So I use mostly the very orange color, but it's a little too bright for true rust. So we'll use a little bit of black material, which I model an anthracite hauler railroad, so black you need plenty of. So we'll add a little bit of black powder to it. Not the fun black powder, but also everything I'm doing is with a mix of India ink there's no way to give you a percentage on this. I just add alcohol. It evaporates pretty quickly anyway, and I just add alcohol and occasionally add a little bit of ink back to it. But test it out on your paper, and it's really quite thin at this point. So there couldn't be more than a few drops of India ink in it, which is incredibly, incredibly rich material. When I'm working with something that I don't care about some black in, so in some of these other colors where I have white powder and some of these other dust colors, I will use the absolute pure 91% alcohol to bring these dry mixes back to life or to make them up. However, for anything that has some black in it, just use my base India ink mix to get a little bit of alcohol into the material. The first thing we'll do is take care of the trucks on the bottom of it. Well, because they're easy and they give you a very quick reaction, really quick change to the model. So honestly, you could dual coat your models, paint the trucks, and maybe a touch here and there, and actually improve your models considerably over stock or over what a lot of people do. So this is a pretty dry mix, and we'll go back over it. So I put it on kind of dry so that so I can kind of work it into some gaps, etc. And then I'll go back and wash over it with just the India ink mixture and alcohol, or just plain alcohol, to kind of mute it down a little bit or take some of the richness off from it. So and part of the reason that I like working this method so well is that, it's not going to come exactly 100% clean with alcohol, but most of what you're doing is not very permanent, and it's an easy layer that you can put on and start manipulating. So the really obvious stuff to do is the sides of the bright plastic trucks. So they rust pretty much everywhere, especially on a model that's been in service for 30 years. Surely they've been worked on and maintained, but they are going to be very rusty. And Sometimes we'll take them off. If I have the trucks off, I will go ahead and touch the tops of the journals um, and the tops of the components, but I do try to get the bottoms of them as well. Um, Depends on the side of your layout and the height of your layout, exactly how critical some of this stuff will be, but I have a fairly high viewing height on the layout I'm building, and one deck that is considerably above my height, and that means that the underbelly of cars is visible in ways that is not typically. So anyway, just get a little bit of this material on, touch it back up, and it's going to be a little thick to begin with, at least at the consistency that I like to work with it at. But we will wash a little bit off from it, especially any spots that that degrade the shape of all the components. Okay, that's pretty much it. Okay, now get some of this material. And I keep using the same brush for this material. Now, I have a brush for working with some dry materials. I have a brush for working with some of the lighter materials. A selection of small brushes to touch into some of the smaller areas. These are really, really incredible. Somewhat stiff. I haven't used this one today, but somewhat stiff, pointed, that are incredible for pointing in the rivet lines of the sheets that are very prone to rusting. So, all right, this material off. Now, I find, and I can't explain the exact chemical properties that make this happen, but dull coat gives a texture. It also changes, of course, the brightness of or shininess of, that's its job. But it does, dull coat changes the texture of a model and gives it a little something to bite. And for whatever reason, whether it's alcohol opening the pores of the paint or something to that effect, because it has to be something like that, I find that the dry material does take somewhat well to the alcohol, if not as well as it does for dull coat. But we'll get a quick shot of this at a very thin consistency on. So this will take the sheen off the model and take the brightness down and start giving you an idea of where you'll want to darken it up and lay on some very serious weathering. Now, you should look at a picture of the prototype you're modeling, and there's some things that are somewhat obvious that are going to happen to every single car. They're going to rust in certain places. Pretty much all coal hoppers are going to be kind of dirty and black around the top. Most of the trucks are fairly the same, etc. And you should also, and something people don't necessarily always tell you, is that you should definitely look at the era that you're modeling. So some of the guys who are modeling the much later models, much more modern prototypes, do a tremendous lot more rusting and a tremendous lot more weathering on a lot of their models because age, the economy of the railroads, etc., have changed their ability to maintain, buy, repair, or replace equipment. I model the early 50s, and some cars, such as the one that we're working with today, have seen a fairly long life on the railroad. However, 1950s, they were still doing pretty well from all the wartime efforts and wartime money that the railroads had made. So, and that matters. Also look, especially, of course, take a look at models and pictures of models in your region. There's different effects that happen in Virginia and West Virginia, the areas that I model. There's particular effects to equipment that may or may not be or will be different in or on western roads or on very, very southern roads or very, 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 very northern roads. So take that all into account. Okay, quick cover to give us something to let that stick to. Alcohol dries incredibly fast. There is some tricks that you can use for certain things. Not done it a lot, but if you really want something to set really quick, sometimes with these wood loads, you'll want to really darken some spots up, and you'll lay it on and want it to sit there for a while so that it can soak in and darken some spots. But you can also use a blow dryer to cause that alcohol to basically disappear really quick. All right. One of the things that I absolutely love about working with these dry mixes is that this was once just dry powder with a few drops of alcohol added to it, and it dries up. And a drop or two of alcohol added back to this mix will bring it back to life in a second. All right. We need some India ink. So, this stuff is incredibly powerful. There's a little bit in the bottom of that pan that we were using earlier, but it will come back to life. That little bit of India ink that was there and an extra drop we'll add will come back to life with very little 91% alcohol bought at the nearest pharmacy for a couple dollars. So, there's not an expensive product I'm using here. I think all combined, I think one of these brushes probably cost as much as every other component here. So it's not necessary to spend a tremendous amount of money buying some branded weathering powders. As you've seen, I made mine from fairly cheap artist chalk, and some of these other colors come from a $2 pack of Crayola Kids Street chalk from Walmart or Target or somewhere. A couple dollars. So, alright, let's see how far this gets us. And an eyedropper or a pipette would be a tremendous lot easier than doing it with a brush. But we might as well bring our dust color back to life because we're definitely going to be using that one. So, the colors that we definitely want to use today are, this is a chalk mix with of the closest to rust color I can find, one of my favorite colors, with a bit of black added, maybe 1 to 3 black to rust color, something in that neighborhood. This is the straight black chalk with alcohol added to it. This is a sepia color. I like real well. Looks really good for road dust. I also have a nearly white, this might be called gray or something similar to that. Actually, that's what it is. It's really good on some cars, not necessary for a hopper because it's going to be black and rust. And then this is just India ink and alcohol, and then here is some dry of the sepia that we'll use at the end. And I use this more as a buffing powder, if nothing else, than anything else. Some of it will stick. A lot of it is about giving us a bit of an abrasive that will also rub into the color of dirt, dust, gravel. So, that's those things. Alright. So let's put rust in some key areas. So, first, these are some hard to reach places, but, and don't you trust this very well if you ride Amtrak or something, is that all the brake equipment that you depend on so much is always incredibly rusty, never painted, and completely unmaintained. But it works, and for our purposes and for model purposes, it's always extremely rusty. And on a hopper, incredibly hard to get to. Boxcars, really nice, really easy to get to, very easy to rust. And as I suggested on my particular layout, the very top deck is at a considerably above eye level, and the track is near the perimeter, which means that some of the undercarriages, under some circumstances, may be more visible. So, I'm going to have a little bit more of that material. Let's pick up what we've got to work with, though. Okay, um, this brakeman's platform definitely gets rusty, as it is a good place for, it doesn't take much, but very little on, and actually when we come back and wash it with India ink and alcohol, the goal will be to take more of it off. So the brake wheel and the chains and the brakeman's platform will definitely rust. You'll see there's already, if possible, you'll see already discoloration that we definitely want. Ladders tend to rust, so I'll touch them a little bit now and maybe come back and touch them a little bit more um, after the fact. So I'm not too worried about couplers. I do those in a separate thing. I may do a video on one of them with those. This car still has KDs on it. I will surely replace it with Surgeon couplers soon. So, alright. Now, get rid of some of that material so we can work with just the black materials. So, this is going to be a pretty rich mixture to begin with. Again, the great thing about alcohol is it's semi-permanent, I suppose. And like I said, it's pretty rich material. So, we'll take this material with a touch of the dry and alcohol material that gives a bit of a texture to it. You know, when coal dust is on stuff, it's not just a color. It does not look like it's been painted with black spray paint. It has a texture to it. So you want to use a pretty rich India ink mixture to give it color, and the dry black material gives it a texture that's pretty hard to replicate any other way. So these, of course, your chutes are always going to be extremely dusty. And I go ahead and do, as I've said, the undercarriage. You may not have to put much focus on that, but in my case, I have to lay that on pretty good. And a little bit more of that material. And a little shovel's handy. Alright. That's it. You don't see immediate results, but once you've done this just a time or two in this method, you'll see how quickly when you come back to it, you can see the material building up on here, and it will look like exactly like what you expect: grime, dirt, dust, and it has a visible texture to it. Even at this small of a scale, it has a visible texture, and it definitely doesn't look like just paint. It has variations and high spots and low spots, and I really like this method versus just color. So an airbrush has its place, and I'm not so sure that coming back over top of my models with an airbrush an effect is not going to be something I'll do. I think it's a really good idea to do, and some of the guys have suggested that. This method does tend to have a bit of, and maybe not so much in using the dry materials as much as the India ink materials, tends to have a bit of a streakiness nature to it that I'm not 100% satisfied with my results on, but the chalk buffing compound method is somewhat satisfactory so far. So this is a process, and until you dull coat it, you can continue to work it. So I don't plan on dull coating these in the near future. As I perfect my method, then I'll dull coat. Alright. Those last little spots, make sure everything's covered. It's easy to come back and hit it again, however. Alright, now let's find a place to put our finger that's not destroying our work already, and lay some material to the outside of this. Now you'll want I don't use this dry material a lot on it, just it's a little more intense of a mixture. So I like just the India ink and a pretty stiff mixture of alcohol to color. So, and immediately it looks extremely streaky. It does dry a little bit better than that, and like I said, we will lay some dry material on top of it. You don't want it to be incredibly even. Cold doesn't hit the cars incredibly even. I think the end caps get it pretty bad. It depends on the type of loaders. Again, the era that you model is going to contribute to that. So, flood loaders have a different effect on loading hoppers than the single style loaders that were used predominantly in the 50s. So, where they had to stop the loading process between each car. So, with flood loaders, it's not a clean process at any time, but it tends to be, where they hit a little bit early and it hits the front of the car. And with traditional single car loading methods, it tends to be a lot of dust around the sides of the car just because of how the chutes tend to work. So, again, picky about your model, and just get some material on. We can adjust that by using either more of the rich India ink mixture with alcohol, or if we want to remove some of that, we can use straight alcohol. On some older pieces of rolling stock, your mileage may vary with using straight alcohol or even this 91 and India ink mixture because of the way and products that they used for paint, and more importantly, more noticeable, more rememberable by me with some of those models is how bad it affected decals. But that don't seem to be the case on these modern models. Alright, and coal also tended to pool in a few areas. Above the coupler housing, it's not uncommon to see coal pool in, around the brake equipment, anywhere that it has a place to sit. We'll come back and hit a few key areas too with rust after we've got this material on and before we do the dry. The corners, and there's a few reasons why that would happen, that are open and exposed, tend to rust pretty bad on these slope end hoppers. So we'll definitely want to lay some of our rust mixture on there. I need to make a little bit more of that material up. Like I said, you can make this material up in small batches. It's easy to add a little bit of alcohol back to it to bring it back to life at any time. It's also really easy to just kind of make on the fly. So, alright, so quick cover. Let's not cover our rust work there, but quick cover of, get down behind your grab irons if you're lucky enough to have modeled equipment that has the not molded on grab irons. I absolutely cannot stand those pieces of hardware. There's just something about these meticulous molded grab irons. And you have a quite grimy car, and you could probably about stop there. But, so, again, there's a few key areas that collect. Of course, your top bevel. On most layouts, where you have a slightly higher viewing angle, which admittedly is pretty good for switching, you do see that the top of the car is more than anything else. You'll definitely want to do that. I'm not weathering the interior of this car. I use I don't typically take the loads out. This one will have a load for it. I'll typically take the loads out, and I will have a system in place on the layout for switching loads and empties out, not live on the layout, but between operating sessions. And such, and not going down the road and building a loader that operates. At one time I thought I would, but I don't think so. Okay, now we got some color. Now we'll go back and lay some rust on, get a little bit of this blackness out, and let's see if we have enough rust material to take care of a few rust spots that we want to capture on here. I think we probably do. You may have better luck with wetter or drier mixes depending on what I'm doing, how thick I want to get it on. Sometimes I will use a fairly dry mix. But if you just want to get, or if you want to especially get it into detailed areas, I really like the really wet mix to let it flow into the seams under the doors and some of that tend to happen around boxcar doors. And for our case here, we've got plenty for what we're going to do. The corners, we'll want to make sure that we hit those real lightly, and then we'll come back with just the ink mix and kind of clean this up in just a second. So it doesn't take much. You'll barely be able to see it until it starts to dry, but as it starts to dry, the alcohol will go away, and the particles and the particulate matter that are the chalk will start to shine and show their texture. So hit your corners a little bit. Let's see where water sets. Grab irons are really common to rust, of course, when we can. Just a little bit of air. Just about alcohol. I mean, it's black to look at it, but it's just about alcohol. Kind of flow down behind our grab iron to make sure that rust doesn't cover up our car. And then use a little bit of that straight alcohol mixed. There's a few spots where you'll notice it lays in ways and in shapes that appear to not be extremely natural. So in those areas, I just kind of wash those out. So our grab irons can make that look, it's a harder area to make it consistent, but you want to do that. To add a little bit more color to that, and you can just take the brush and flow it, just kind of push it in there and let it flow down behind the grab irons, and that will give you a somewhat smoother consistency. Try to make some quicker movements. That seems to be a little less prone to streaking. Okay. Alright, now use that small pointed brush. That one. And we'll give a little bit of a point to it, roll it around and get it to point up just a little bit. I'm going to point a few of these areas that tend to collect rust. So these divisions between the bays of the hopper tend to rust. And small lines, you can even, and you may, especially on newer model prototypes, you will have better luck with rust spotting than larger areas of rust. So here I'm just spotting a few areas that will show through on the rust, and we'll wash this car again with a little bit of Indian mixture. So touch those key areas with rust that tend to get bad. Make sure you get in there real well with the brake equipment, because like I said, they always rust horribly. Rivet lines tend to rust out pretty bad. Very gently touching those will bring a little bit of life to it. Tend to do that a lot on flat cars. I like the way that looks where the rivet lines on the bottom of the car always tend to rust pretty bad. But think about how water affects this equipment as well, because when the car is running empty and there's water setting in there, that water is going to obviously do what it does. It's going to oxidize the metal and cause it to rust at the where and in the areas that the water would set. So touching those key areas along the bottom, I said especially where water would sit, will bring a little life and believability to the bottle. Alright, that's all. Okay, now, the last trick of what I'm doing, and I'm still working on perfecting this, is this dry mix of a little bit of black in there. I don't want to clean dirt, if that's the way to say that, but and this sepia color, which is it's closer to tan than anything else. And this brush that I used, that I picked alcohol with up, which dries out incredibly quick, it's pretty easy to pick the material up and get it on the car. Now, it will not stick to the car, not like using dull coat, but you can get it on a flat surface. And then I use a few methods, one of which mostly just being my fingers, to rub that material in. Like I said a minute ago, I use it as much as a buffing compound as a coloring agent, but it will leave its effects as a coloring agent. So, these, it's just a makeup applicator, so either try to talk your wife out of it, or maybe catch her gone and take it if you don't want to have to explain what you're doing with it. But they're not bad for rubbing this material in. And just so a couple things is that the India ink tends to streak in the way that you brush. You're naturally going to brush down. So working in opposite direction to that does remove some of that streakiness material. And it's not bad at all. This also helps you keep it from getting into the rivet lines, and I'll show you in a second how I peel some of that out that inevitably gets stuck in there. I also use my fingers a lot for it, especially in areas where I've used a high concentration of the black, because of course, the more black's in there, the more noticeable streaks will be, and getting my fingers in there, I can rub with some force. I also save the material sometimes, especially if I use very much, so I'll take a little bit of that off. Alright. And I don't want the dirt to stick into the rivet lines, so a toothpick down the rivet lines will take that tends to pack in there out. Alright. And that's the effect. So, with the dry powder material, it doesn't seem to be that the streakiness is very evident. It does look like it has had a pretty heavy coloring of coal and grime that has built up from it being loaded and unloaded, and quite a bit of dust, some on top, some not. that has been picked up along the road at 25 miles an hour, and a little bit of rust. It's got some age on it, but in the 50s. They were still maintaining their equipment pretty well. So I'll leave you with that while I complete the other sides. If you want to take the same procedure to the ends, not a lot different to them. On flood load cars, you may want to concentrate and make a pretty rich coal, because a lot of times the operator, depending on his skill level, may start or end the loading process slightly before or after the end of the car. That's a natural tendency. But all right, hope you enjoyed. Good luck with your weathering efforts. I absolutely believe in making our equipment look like it's done a day's work. Thank you.